So now, well, I think what we could do is maybe Vandana, would you like to respond to what Anna and INYAKU-san have just said? Because I would like to have more interactions among the three of you.
Well, I definitely want to say thank you to both of them for their excellent work and excellent presentations. And this is the most important work. You know, these are not academic issues. These are life and death issues. And when INYAKU-san was presenting and talking about the OK seed, INYAKU-san, do you know John Fagan?
John Fagan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah.
Because he worked out this test that you can identify even one editing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Open source test.
You know? Yeah. So one is that. The second is, you know, they say it's precision. Gene editing is precision. But now there's so much research that one change leads to 1,500 changes. And I would just suggest to you, you know, one, we did a book called The Future of Our Daily Bread, which has, and it's available on the NAVDANYA International website. The second, even more important book is The Gates to a Global Empire. And this has a very big section written by one of the top molecular biologists and geneticists of the world on why it is wrong to talk of gene editing as precise. And he's all hundreds of references of all the evidence of not just imprecision, but unanticipated harm. For example, they wanted to make cows without horns, and the cows then had bacteria, you know, and bacterial infection, and they all had to be killed. So Gates to a Global Empire and our, the future of our daily bread. And I had talked about this also in my book, Oneness versus 1%. And if you were to write to me, INYAKU-san, I'll just talk to my colleagues, and you are very free to translate all this into Japanese for your campaign. And I think the second thing that I think is so important came out from, you know, my little presentation, and then Anna's presentation, is how the food of Asia, which was safe in the hands of Asia, soybean, has been turned into the biggest reason for ecocide on the planet. The killing, I mean, I have watched in Amazon how indigenous people are being killed by the soybean mafia, you know? So I think it would be really good to work on a global campaign to stop the soya imperialism, I call it, yeah? What we need is soya sovereignty. And, you know, that little campaign I've put on Reclaim the Seed, I think it'd be so good if China and Japan and Indonesia and India could join hands as countries where soya evolved and gave us healthy food to say we will reclaim the soya, and the same for rice, we will reclaim our rice, because they are going to make our rice illegal to force feed us with GMO rice. They'll make our foods illegal to force feed us. And I also want to mention, because again, it's linked to the, you know, the first product that they sold as natural, you know, they were trying to do genetic engineering to say it's natural and can't be detected, that argument. This was the company, Calyxt. And this has failed. Their GMO soya has failed. And I think the failure of this as the first gene-edited product is something you should also spread, in both because it is a failure, but also because I think reclaim the soya, reclaim the indigenous cultures of soya in Asia, and no to the imperialist culture of soya in the Amazon, and in Venezuela, and in Argentina, and everywhere where it's colonizing indigenous people. And I would be so happy if we could all work together and maybe a year from now, do a common report on this. It would be very powerful.
It's a great idea. I think we have to get back soy culture, because it is completely destroyed. And now native traditional soy varieties are dying because we don't have, it's very hard for seed breeders to keep, seed savings. And now it will be, global seed will occupy all over Japan. So I think this is the very important task to save our soy culture and to stop soy destruction in
Yes.
Latin America.
Yes.
We have to combine the two struggles.
And the two go together.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. Great idea, I think. Thank you so much.
Maybe I'll just add a little bit thing. Before, of course, China grew its own soya, and also, but then since the early 90s, China lost its almost totally lost its soya sovereignty. And it's quite a story behind that, because there was the manipulation of prices and then after that, then most of the soya companies, they went bankrupt, and then they were taken over. So it's a very tragic story. So I think so the question is now for Vandana, you just mentioned that we should be having this global campaign to stop soya imperialism. But then, for your in your seed banks, so do you still could you be promoting and keeping the non-GMO soya? Because most of soya we find now is GM.
Yep. So the only place where soya used to grow, because there are two species of soya, one is the very ancient one, and then there's the more contemporary one. So India only have the ancient one, and we call it bhat, and we have 4 varieties, and we don't just save it, we use it, because it makes extremely good dal, and it also makes very good snacks. You just have to roast it. My mother used to love it. You just roast it on a pan, and it makes a wonderful snack. The beauty about the seed is that if you have even one left, you can multiply. I remember I had brought two grains of an old wheat, and we multiplied it. And that old wheat, which does not give gluten allergy, is now spread all over. We had just a few seeds of the salt-tolerant rices, and now we've multiplied them and they're all over. So let us have a common campaign to stop soya imperialism, which includes the destruction of the Amazon and the Cerrado, which includes the spraying of Roundup and spreading cancer, which includes the violence against indigenous people, and rebuilding soya sovereignty, which would have 3 elements. I think a soya seed bank, where somewhere where soya is growing, it'll be in the hill areas, in the remote areas, a multiplication of those seeds. The second is the second aspect of the soya sovereignty is indigenous foods from soya, which I mentioned, the fermentation. And the third is showing how global, when you mentioned 90s is when your soya disappeared, 90s is when globalization was institutionalized. 91 is when it was imposed on India through the World Bank and IMF, and 95 worldwide. But 90s is the time the corporate hijack of food by the anti-food lobby. I will call them the anti-food lobby, because they destroy food. They destroy the quality of food. And I think there's another thing, because you're in a university, we are doing this work in India. They keep talking of yield. The reason at the breeding level, and this is also important for INYAKU-san, the only reason they destroy our native seeds is by saying they're low yielding. But our work in NAVDANYA has shown that in terms of nutrition, they're higher yielding. In terms of weight, they might be lower yielding. In terms of size, they might be lower. But what matters in food is nutrition, and we measure health per acre and nutrition per acre. So if in Japan, in China, you could get some of your labs to look at the old varieties of soya and the GMO soya and look at the nutritional content. That will be very, very important.
Thank you. So we also have some questions on. So maybe for on the Q&A, there's a question. So that is from S2 Putri Vilujan. So hello, I would like to ask about the real food. The GMO pros tend to use the food availability as a reason to keep producing. Then how can we answer this issue? Is it by growing our own food? Is it enough to fulfill everyone's need? Meanwhile, the soil to grow the food is limited from time to time. And I also want to ask about rice, food, and colonialism. Rice is always blamed as carbon source, which is not healthy, or a carbo source, which is not healthy for our life. Almost every diet program tend to exclude rice as one of the menu. Is it colonialism or real rice's nutrition content?
Yeah, very important question. So, you know, they keep talking about GMO as a reason for feeding the world. The reason this argument is false, number one, most GMOs are being used to feed factories and cars. 90% soya goes for animal feed and biofuel. Only 10% goes for human food. So the first argument is over. Second, small farms today produce 80% of the food we eat. This is FAO data. The large farms growing soya grow only 20% of the food. And most of that is toxic. It's nutritionally empty. So second argument, gone. Yeah. Third argument, that you need GMOs to increase yields and food. GMOs have nothing to do with production. So let me explain the technique so that you know. How is a GMO made? If I do a BT cotton, my BT cotton is this plant. And I want to introduce in it a toxic gene that I take from the soil and shoot with a gene gun. Of course, I don't shoot into the plant, I shoot it into the cells of the plant in a Petri dish. Now, the technology is so unreliable, that about 1 in 100,000 shootings enter the place where you want it. Yeah, so you're shooting, but of the 100,000 cells, most of it doesn't enter the cell. And the few places it does enter the cell, it goes to the wrong place and does the wrong thing, because living organisms are self-organized organisms, and that means where a gene is decides how it will behave. And because it's so unreliable, they have to add antibiotic resistance markers. And there's already a big problem with antibiotic resistance. So they shoot a toxic gene called BT, but the same goes for Roundup Ready, the same application. Then you add an antibiotic resistance marker. So every GMO you eat, you're eating antibiotic resistance. And if you have TB and you're eating antibiotic resistance TB drug, in the GMO, you're going to get more antibiotic resistance. Your TB won't be treated. But the third is the most important element, which is viral promoters. Now, if I do an organ transplant, my body has a tendency to reject. That's why they have to give us so many drugs to retain the organ. The same is for plants. They don't want a new gene. So they have a tendency to silence and reject. So to make its behavior express itself, they add a viral promoter. Virulent viruses are added. It's called the cauliflower mosaic virus. Now, you might remember that the last time around, a corona hit China and Japan, it was the SARS virus. Remember? And I got a letter from a Chinese scientist, because I was working on GMOs and biosafety, and I worked on the UN laws on biosafety. And he said, I think what you've been saying is true, because this food with the viral promoter, this GM soya, has an antibiotic resistance marker, a viral promoter, and a toxic gene of Roundup resistance. This is going into our gut. Scientifically, we know there is horizontal gene transfer. Yeah, genes jump. So here is a viral promoter, a horrible virus, which jumps to the gut of the animal and now hybridizes, and then becomes a SARS virus and escapes. And then it leaps from the animal species to the human species. This too is established. They used to say the mad cow disease can't jump to humans. It did. It killed 12 people in England. So, A, GMOs don't produce more. 2, many of the new problems we are facing are coming from GMOs. The Roundup use, 125,000 cancer cases in America. Mumbai has lost 4 of those cases. The WHO said that it is a carcinogen, Roundup, and yet they're clearing it and moving it everywhere. On the second side of your question about rice, rice is the ultimate crop of sovereignty, both because it is an Asian crop. We have, in India, we evolved 200,000 rice varieties from one grass, but in Japan, you know, you've had short varieties, and it's the wheat variety of Japan that was stolen during the war, taken to Mexico by Borlaug, and Borlaug is given the honor of this wheat, but it was Japanese wheat. It was a biopiracy of Japanese wheat called the Norin wheat. Similarly, there's short rice called Dewanju, which was in Indonesia, which was brought to make the short dwarf varieties of Erie. And now all the rice collections are in Erie, which Gates is claiming. And the person who taught me seed saving was the rice researcher who had worked on rice and taught us that we've evolved 200,000 varieties. He used to be the director of the Rice Research Center in Qatar. And when the World Bank wanted to take the rice from India to Philippines, he said, this is our sovereignty. We can't just give it away. And he was removed by the World Bank. He continued to save seed. He continued to teach people like me how you save seeds, how you work with indigenous knowledge. So rice has always been a threat, seemed a threat by empire. And I'll give you an example. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong used to unite, because when you do rice transplanting, you all have to work together in harmony, and it builds community. And Kissinger said, we have to destroy their rice to break their community, because we are not able to defeat the Viet Cong. And they started to use food as a weapon. Kissinger said we've got to turn Asia into a bread-eating culture and stop the rice. In a way, Bill Gates is continuing the rice imperialism by saying he's hoping that we'll all be forced to eat golden rice in the name of blindness. Okay? But all of our rices are nutritious. They're different. We have purple rice and black rice and red rice. And if you don't mill the rice, you know, if you don't polish the rice, it has iron, it has oil. So what is rice bran oil? They take the bran off the rice and then take the oil out. But if you were eating whole rice, you would be eating the oil rather than buying it as a separate ingredient. When you eat polished rice, yes, it becomes pure carbohydrate. But when you have the roughage with it, the fibers with it, it is very, very nutritious. And our scientists in India have shown that indigenous rices have 14 to 20% higher nutrition than the new varieties bred for high yielding. That's why I said, when we look at any food, we should look at the yield of nutrition. And that's why in NAVDANYA, we evolved, instead of yield per acre, we evolved health per acre and nutrition per acre. And you can go to the navdanya.org website and find this report, because I, for 10 years, worked on biodiversity productivity. What does the whole farm give? Then I took this biodiversity data and converted into nutrition tables. We could feed 2 times India's population if we conserve biodiversity and our native seeds. Globally, we could feed 2 times the world's population if we conserved biodiversity, used native seeds, did agroecology, and had local distribution.
I think Anna is back. So Anna, would you like to say something?
I was saying that even with all the evidence that we currently have amid the crisis, that this model of knowledge that is racist, it is patriarchal, it is imperialist, and it has deepened and it has actually become the main cause, as we see in Shiva's work, it is a main cause of the crisis that we currently have. Sanitary crisis, they are controlling our lives with it. Therefore, we still have a great absence in terms of creating alliances. That is to say, we don't acknowledge the power of our own indigenous systems. In the case of Latin America, for example, we are very much fragmented in our struggles by thinking, for example, in this invitation of looking at ourselves as a South-South alliance. I think that that was very much pending in the previous presentations. We saw how these models advance in getting hold of the funds, and by funds I mean workers' funds, people's funds, and all that is so unequal, so unequally grabbed and used. All initiatives to safeguard the land, or even more. With those evidences, we still have our alliances very much fragmented among peasants organizations, amongst indigenous organizations. Our agendas are so fragmented, trying to find, or in the struggle to defend the land, all the indigenous groups are defending their lands separately. So that creates a lot of weakness. We have a lot of power, a lot of power. Actually, when Dr. Shiva was mentioning at the very beginning about the importance of connecting ourselves, connecting all the legacy of indigenous knowledge in terms of health that we currently have in Asia, in the rest of the world, I mean, we cannot continue postponing that. We cannot. We cannot postpone the possibility of a better life because, I mean, we are running out of time, and we can see this very clearly right now, how all public funds, which are our funds as citizens, how they just privilege a part of people, how our national governments take control of that, and they even endanger and expand the control on our food. So they create a process of enlarging the dictatorship, because I would call it the dictatorship of hunger, the dictatorship of food. In the case of Venezuela, in the case of Haiti, we can see the disarticulation of all these local peasants, construction, and harvests. The so-called policies or aid policies or food aid policies, they are not helping us. And that's when the whole thing starts. The problems, the dismantling of our systems start, and they create greater poverty. In the case of Venezuela, we are having an invasion. We are having an invasion of international agencies who claim to say that they are supporting us, who say that our main problem is hunger. So they are bringing seeds of corporations into our territories, same format as they did in other territories before. When, as a matter of fact, in our communities, there is a resistance and nourishing process in our communities that is revitalizing the indigenous knowledge. We have indigenous peoples who worked and struggled for 200 years to defend their territories from European occupation in the 16th, 17th century. That's the legacy that we have to keep our days. So the big challenge that we have ahead of us is to manage to articulate those ways of knowledge so that at a global scale, but south-south, because we are articulated at the southern, from a southern point of view. We have very strong agendas, the agenda of La Via Campesina, for example, the agenda of the indigenous peoples, but we are fragmented. So the pandemic is shedding light on all of this. And we've seen this throughout all the conversations, all the lectures, whether we are talking about food, whether we're talking about the pandemic, health. That's the basis, the foundation for a true democracy. So I believe that the steps that we need to take and that we are invited to do, is to go deeper into this linkage, to link ourselves better. And it has to come from a Southern perspective. There's no other way around it. We don't have any more time to lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. There are quite a number of questions on the chat, so I'll read it out. Mano from India, he's written that this is a great lecture and comments. Thank you. So Pituit has a question. So can we also analyze the traditions of women worshipping food items to reinforce ecological civilization practices? Maybe I'll just read out a few questions, and maybe and Vandana, you can answer them together. And the second, the question from some Chinese audience is, well, we have 400 people in the Chinese media listening to the lecture now. So the first question is, Professor Shiva, could you say more about the role of the Indian traditional medicine in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic? The second question is, big foundations like Bill Gates Foundation and a few big pharma companies, they control the global health system. How can we resist the Western medical imperialism? And then another question is, another question also from the Chinese audience is, what do you think about the current Indian farmers' protests? And what is your opinion about vaccination? Do you think it can beat the COVID-19? And we all have Beatrice from Brazil. Her comment is excellent speeches. This subject is vital for the future of humanity. It is not my field of research, but as a citizen of this challenged world, I would like to contribute to a world campaign against the destructive way agriculture is being managed. Brazil is in a rapid process of destruction of life in its various forms nowadays with the Bolsonaro's government. And congratulations to all the speakers and to Vandana in particular, who has inspired so many researchers and activists. And then we have questions from Gustave from France, but maybe would you, maybe I'll just read them all out. Okay, so thank you to the ever-inspiring Vandana. The good news is that the Via Campesina, one of the most important social movements in the world, has succeeded in putting forward the idea that peasant agriculture is more appropriate and modern than agribusiness, and in proposing a strategy with the refusal of GMOs and the promotion of food sovereignty. Yes, so Vandana, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. Even though your network was interrupted often, and INYAKU, of course. So dear Bidyut, you've done the most amazing book on Lakshmi, the Rebel. And, you know, in Orissa, we have a very strong program on rice in Orissa and on food. And I have to say, the two parts of India, which are totally underestimated for food, are Bengal and Orissa. They have very, very high culture. And when they harvest the rice, they have it in a beautiful container. It's either brass or it's hand woven or basket woven by bamboo. Beautiful. And this rice is Lakshmi. She's the goddess of wealth. And in addition, the whole story of Lakshmi, you know, that she basically refused to have her casteist husband, you know, she refused to cook for him, he had to starve. So till he agreed to eat from anyone's home. And this is the subject of Bidyut's book called Lakshmi the Rebel. Please read it, because both Manoranjan Mahanti and Bidyut Mahanti are from Orissa. And like I said, it is one of the most sophisticated rice cultures. We have a little booklet, which we did, I think 10 years ago, the festivals of biodiversity, because every month there's a festival of biodiversity in Orissa around the rice, the sowing of rice, the pregnancy of rice, the harvesting of rice, every stage of the cycle of rice, like her personhood. The role of Indian medicine in dealing with COVID is a very important question. Now, throughout India, whoever turned towards indigenous medicine, and we have a whole ministry, Ayush, on indigenous medicine, and they had recommendations. They had recommendations of Giloy, they had recommendation of all the anti-immunity building, of ginger, of turmeric, and we share so much in Chinese medicine. But of course, the Western medicine went after, yeah, to the extent that I know, you know, a fellow scientist, like I shifted from physics to ecology and agriculture, she shifted to doing Ayurveda, and she runs a hospital, and she cured COVID patients with Indian medicine. And she gave a talk in the memory of one of our leading scientists. You won't believe it. YouTube removed her talk. Yeah. So that's the level of censorship that's going on, because Big Pharma, like if, let me take a step back. What is Big Pharma? Big Pharma is the same poison cartel. The IG Farben, the Rockefellers, the Monsanto's, Bayer's, Dow, DuPont, that same group of people that created chemicals for Hitler's labs and for the wars, they basically became the seed companies, but they were also always from the beginning the promoters of the pharmaceutical industry. So Big Pharma, Big Ag, Big Poison are one. They're the same companies. So Bayer gives you cancer through Roundup and then has the patented cancer drug. They tried to challenge our laws, which say you have to make a new medicine, just a new formulation doesn't make a new medicine. And they tried to challenge our laws, just like Monsanto tried to challenge our seed laws. And they were defeated. But if they had won, the costs of cancer treatment would have been 125,000 rupees a month rather than 10,000 rupees a month, which is what the generic drug costs. We know also right now, you know, the whole vaccine issue. First, they said everyone must have a vaccine. And then they have patents on vaccine. The patents begin in 2015. And I do think our Chinese journalists should investigate this a little more. If it was so sudden, how come you were taking patents on the vaccine for Corona in 2015? There's a whole list of patents on the Corona, on the broad spectrum vaccines. So there was a preparation of a monopoly by Big Pharma. And since colonialism, they have been trying to push down indigenous knowledge. And Anna talked a lot about indigenous knowledge. And I think we need very seriously both a resurrection of indigenous knowledge, but also recognition that mechanistic reductionism is a very crude and primitive technology that was proven wrong 100 years ago when quantum theory came. What did quantum theory bring us? Non-locality and non-separability. So anything that says things are separate is false science. Quantum theory said there's nothing like essential qualities built into the seed, that this seed is primitive, it's low yielding, it's a potential, yeah? It's a potential you cultivate by giving the seed good soil. Both Indian medicine and Chinese medicine are based on two things that are the best of modern science and best of quantum theory. Potential, not essential qualities, and balance. Why do you have yin and yang? Why do we have a balance between the three doshas? And that's why I was saying we need much more work to show the crudeness of a mechanistic worldview and an invasive worldview and an external input worldview and a celebration of self-organization, which in science is now being called autopoiesis, self-organization. In Chinese medicine and in Indian medicine, the body has the potential to heal itself as long as if you allow it to come back into homeostasis. Yeah, you allow it to come back into balance. These are sophisticated scientific concepts, but the crudest greed of colonialism that created the opium wars, you know, we know what the history was. The crudest of thinking of food as a weapon is right now thinking it's ruling. So throughout history, we have found new ways to organize against unaccountable power. What we are living through is a gang of poor poison makers, for privateers of the social good. You know, they're rent collectors. What is the big tech? Rent collectors. Poison makers, big farmers, disease creators, rent collectors. They have created systems to dismantle. So we have to work with diversity. Anna talked about diversity. Diversity is necessary for health. In Ayurveda, it says eat at least 6 tastes. And if you eat 6 tastes, you will have diversity, and our gut microbiome will be happy. I'm sure China has the same things. Let us work on a simple little booklet on the common, sophisticated science behind Chinese medicine and Indian medicine and the crudeness of big pharma. And at the beginning of the thing, I did with an Ayurvedic physician, a book called The Two Futures of Food, Health, and Humanity. It's available on Amazon, unfortunately, because the people who published it put it up on there. There's 2 futures of food, health, and humanity. And I think we really need an Indian and Chinese ecological civilization approach to pandemics, to diseases, to climate change and balance. What do I think about the current Farmers Project? I shifted from my past of interdisciplinary work in science, technology, and ecology and physics to agriculture in 1984, when the farmers' protest started in Punjab. 30,000 people were killed. This protest today are a continuation of that. Many of them are children and grandchildren. 91, when the new globalization came that destroyed China's soya, that destroyed Latin America with soya, that destroyed Indian agriculture, that is when we started to fight for our food sovereignty and seed sovereignty. 500,000 farmers in Bangalore, 200,000 at the Red Fort in Delhi. Many of the people leading today are children of farmers who worked with me then. And that's around the time Via Campesina was created. They had wanted me to be part of it. And I said, you know, we are a farm, but I'm also a researcher. I also work on women's movements. I work on many, many aspects. So I nominated Indian farmers to Via Campesina, even though the people who founded it from Honduras, Mexico, wanted me very much to. So I feel very much part of Via Campesina. And that was Gustavo's comment. In terms of Anna's question, you see, when things are good and you organize top down, but as you said, things are bad. So you have to organize wherever you are with a common philosophy, protection of the earth and protection of our seed and food sovereignty. And my understanding of change is this, that if you do the right thing in Venezuela, we do the right thing in India. In China, they do the right thing for the earth, for biodiversity, for our health, for our sovereignty, for our resilience, resistance, and regeneration. The resonance of this, you know, in Indian philosophy, we talk about the whole world being vibration. And I don't know how many of you see, if you just tap, right, then different patterns get formed, because resonance is what makes power. What we need is a new resonance. And I want to share with you for knowledge. Here's a book, you know, a publisher asked me to synthesize my 37 years of research on agroecology and biodiversity and climate solutions and farming without pesticides, and how our farmers can earn more and we can have more food and health per acre, wealth per acre. It's called Biodiversity, Agroecology, Regenerative Organic Farming. It's been published by Westfield Press in India. But I can talk and make sure that if any of you in Spanish or in Chinese want to put this out, it has as much data as one can possibly generate in 37 years. And the sophisticated science of biodiversity and agroecology is proven. We have richer soils. We have more food. We have more nutrition in our food. And because our food is more nutritious, we have more health. This is the way forward, a way of harmony, a way of seeds of hope. And if we all do it and don't fall in the trap of divide and rule, which is what the billionaires will do, they'll try and divide us. Just day before, they tried to get me to speak at a platform, and my friends from Italy, on women at the G20, and they sent me to sponsored by Bayer. I said, I'm not going to speak. Bayer had to withdraw from that platform. Of course, I didn't speak. So they're trying to get the women's movement everywhere. We have to defend our integrity. We have to defend our sovereignty, and we have to relate to each other as one humanity on one planet, rich in our indigenous diversity. The local has to be the resurrection. The global is the solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. And INYAKU-san, would you like to say something?
I was so impressed with Vandana's speech. And I think it's really, her speech is so historic, and also it's quite, concentrate on how we do now. So I think it's quite moving. And also everything is, we have to fight against patriarchy structure. And if we can change the structure, we need seed, we need hope of seed. And then how we combine, how we connect, regionally or internationally. And this is, I think, we have to think. We, for example, we have now very good traditional soybeans. We have, but we don't, we have very, it's not really isolated. So if we can combine our work, we can develop much better that this international struggle to change that. I'm sorry. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there's one more question from China, from the Chinese audience. I work in the rural reconstruction movement in China. We promote young people returning to the villages, but this is not easy. Are there such movements in India, and what are the obstacles, and how to overcome the obstacles?
Yeah.
And yes, one more. Well, they keep, because there's the translation process when they put the questions on the other chat room. So then it takes a little bit time to translate them over here. Okay, the second question is, what do you think about the Fukushima nuclear disaster?
So on the issue of rural reconstruction, having worked now for so many years in regeneration of agriculture and protection and defense of the rights of small farmers, both because only they can protect the planet and only they can provide enough food. Small farmers provide 80% of the food, so they have to be protected to feed the world. I have realized that there are 3 blocks that first push people off the land and then prevent them from going back to the land. Now, because we have had so many struggles and movements, we still have villages and we still have farms. So when the COVID struck and the jobs in the cities evaporated and the migrant labor started to walk back, they had something to come back to. And I'm working with a lot of youth. I remember writing a letter saying, the industry might have rejected you, the city might have rejected you, but me as Mother Earth, I welcome you back. And what I want is the care of your hands. I need more hands to care for me. So we define human beings, Descartes defined human beings as thinking things without bodies. We normally define in the food debate, mouths to feed. We don't ever talk about hands to grow. And I think this hands to grow has to be the way. That's why I put our course on the return to earth. If you look at the chat box right at the top, our return to earth course on the A to Z of living seed, living soil, living food, living economies that we have practiced for 37 years, and we teach every October. This is how you can bring people back. Young people are passionate about climate change. If we show them they're doing good farming and caring for the earth, earth care is the best climate change action. Second, they're very passionate about extinction. But most extinction is happening because of poisons in agriculture. That's where species are disappearing. Whether it's in the sea, or it's in the pollinators, or the insects, or the plants. Well, you get rid of poisons, you actually can reverse and stop extinction. You're passionate about health. Growing good food is the single biggest health initiative. Our indigenous medical systems recognize that. But, I have been invited by cancer specialists in New York, in Milan, who have given up their practice and realized that cancer begins in food. And therefore, if you want to treat people, you've got to begin with good food. So what we have to do is for young people to realize that coming back to the land to care for the earth is the best answer for ecological problems, for health problems, for democracy issues, for your feeling of loss. Who are you? By returning to the earth, you remember who you are. So rural reconstruction is really a human reconstruction. The soil, humus, the soil, is human, the people. And that link is what we have to make. So the cultural obstructions is what we have to get rid of. We've got to bring joy and dignity, and that's why we have gardens of hope. And just the other day, I was with our coordinator, the farmers from around the country. And, we do these little initiatives. And of course, you've got to have a common philosophy, but the concrete is important. Saving the seed is important to fight IPRs. We can keep saying no to IPRs, but if you don't have seed, you can't fight it. Defending real food is the way to fight gene-edited crops. So we started, when the hopelessness was seeking in, we started Gardens of Hope. The feedback I received from a village, the coordinators were there, 10 gardens were created by working with people. You know how many they've created on their own? 150. This is the potential of multiplication of a seed, of a garden. We must do more of these things. And the last question was, the Fukushima disaster. Well, I was I was in nuclear physics. I was in the fast breeder reactor of India when it was going critical. My future was as a nuclear physicist. And then my sister woke me up to the radiation harms. She said, do you know this? Do you know that? She was a doctor and I didn't know any of this. I knew how to calculate fission equations. So now I find it a bit silly that we create fission and risks of disasters to boil water to make steam. We can do it much more safely. We don't need nuclear.
And two more questions. I think we will be just having these two last questions. And so one is, if we want to defend a small peasantry, we need to have access to land. How can the Global South achieve the land reform that makes sure small peasants have land and practice organic agriculture? And then the last question is, how can we avoid in the process of decolonizing to restitute the endogenous knowledge, health, food, etc., without throwing the baby of Western knowledge with the washing water?
On the first question, the issue of land reform. When we were colonized, and I'm sure they did this for China too, but definitely the British took over all our land. With one stroke of a pen, Lord Cornwallis said all this land of India belongs to England. And we have to pay them rents. And the rent is what led to famine because they were collecting half of the produce as rent. And the last big famine was the Great Bengal Famine 1942. And then the women said, we won't give you our rice. We'd rather give up our lives, but we will not give you our rice. So rice is very important. Well, we became independent. We took back the land. So land reform, this is what the Chinese was about, wasn't it? It was a peasant revolution. It was to take back the land. Via Campesina was talked about. One of the most important players of Via Campesina is the MST, the movement of the landless people of Brazil. They occupy the land. And now that Bill Gates has become the largest farmland owner and wants all the land, he's filing deeds in India. Microsoft will control the land and work with Bayer for that one agriculture. So the time is right for new land reform movements, for new innovations in collective farming. You know, because we've been individualized, we each of think we need our parcel of land, but in our countries, land was never property. We had usufructory rights. We had use rights, and they were hereditary. We never had property rights. These were created by the West during colonialism. So we must fight against property rights to seed. We must fight against property rights to land and reclaim land as a commons because it is Mother Earth. And caring for the earth, just like when we started NAVDANYA, we said, saving seeds is our duty. And therefore, we will not obey your laws that come in the way of our duty. Defending Mother Earth is our duty. And therefore, we will not accept the inevitability that 4 billionaires will be the landlords of the world and extract rents from data, rents from chemicals, rents from seed. Big data is the new oil, as they say. And it's a new rent collection. You know, a smartphone in your hands, and they sell you nonsensical big data, which they mine anyway from the peasants. So it's a new moment of reclaiming the land, reclaiming the seed, reclaiming our food for the common good through indigenous knowledge, and of the baby with the bathwater. You know, we work on soil. The peasants know what living soil is, but they don't have microscopes. Of course, you must marry the power of the microscope to the identification of soil organisms and get indigenous knowledge. The parts of Western knowledge that are not about imperialism and colonization, but are about really knowing more about nature.
So this on the chat, this is not a question, it's a comment from Gustav. Thank you to Vandana for succeeding in building an epistemological rupture by linking the social and the ecological in an internationalist and outer globalist perspective. So, well, once again, we thank Vandana for sharing your very deep knowledge of seeds, of agroecology, farmers' movements, food movements, and your analysis of the nests and nodes of power that are bringing humanity to the brink of collapse. Scathing analysis, however, may increase the sense of despair and helplessness if people do not see ways in which they can take things into their own hands and refuse to be resigned to a dismal fate. So for our forum this time, we highlight people's resilience and resistance as the theme. We use the words self-rescue and self-salvation and creating the future in the Chinese title of the forum, which you can see over here. So Vandana just used the very same terms to take care of ourselves, self-reliance and self-regeneration, which means that instead of relying on external forces which usually dominate and subjugate us to their agenda and their interests, let us look within and also among ourselves as persons, as communities, as gendered subjects, as subalterns, for ways of learning from one another, particularly from our mistakes and failures, and of ways of supporting and helping one another, ways of relying on one another, so that we can organize ourselves for more autonomy and less dependence on global markets and forces that are so detrimental to our capacity to provide for ourselves. And today we have shared not only analysis and ideas, but our passions and optimisms and hope. And these are very, very contagious.